Well, the United States and Qatar have been discussing ways to support and develop defense and security collaboration. Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister met with the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, in Washington, D.C. Both sides said they were emphasizing the importance of continuing coordination and joint consultation to contribute to strengthening regional and international security and stability. Well, joining us from Doha is Zeidon Alkinali. He's the founding director of the Arab Perspectives Institute. Very good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. Let's go back to the stories we're coming at the top of the show. Donald Trump says Iran is begging for a deal. Is it?
Well, it's a war of words. We can't deny that the private talks and the private negotiations have always been there, despite the denial from the Iranian side, based on the evidence that took place for the past 2 days, where there was a confirmation of the Pakistani mediation of handling such talks, and that is expected given the scale and the level of this war. What's really interesting is noticing that there are different and new pressure cards that have erupted from this war. Now, if we were to look at the list of proposals or the conditions that Trump were trying to impose upon Iran, none of these points are new. They've always existed prior to the war. The Iranian government have always been in negotiations either with the US or with the West in discussing them. There might be the vague point about the proxy network, where Iran has been able to claim and sometimes not to claim affiliation based on their contextual interest, whatever happens in Lebanon or in Iran. But two new pressure cards that both sides have been able to implement or discover that they were able to get out of this war is the Hormuz Strait from the Iranian side, and a new card that has been established by Trump's administration in parallel or in a way to counter the Iranian privilege of using the Strait of Hormuz as a political leverage in the economic situation or in the economic conversation in the world, and that is attacking the power plant. It's a new card that Trump is trying to use strategically, politically, but also militarily in the war.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that, because we saw initially that Donald Trump was the one essentially that brought the Strait of Hormuz into play in this. Iran, we always knew that Iran had that as leverage, and in the past has said that it threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, but it was Donald Trump bringing ships towards the region that kind of, to some degree, is said to have forced Iran's hand in that, or forced it to use that leverage. At the same time, we now have Donald Trump saying, no, we're going to hit the power plants, and that is where we're going to be focusing on now. What's your assessment of the way that Donald Trump is, first of all, using the Strait of Hormuz, but then immediately switching to the power plants, but telegraphing to Iran that this is what his intention is?
Well, it's a reflection of an ability to have the upper hand and the symbolic power to threaten an enemy that they are able to dismantle not just the political system, but also the infrastructure. A country mostly relies on its resources, whether that's electricity, water, oil, energy, and it also makes it a very alarming issue for the region beyond and the world. We've seen what has happened to the oil and the fuel prices, to the global economy, including the United States itself. So bringing that conversation, shedding light into the US ability and the US preparedness to further dismantle and further destroy whatever energy infrastructure that exists within the Iranian regime, allowing the hope from an American military perspective and point of view that even if the war were to end today or in a week or two, we have destroyed the Iranian regime and economy enough that it will make it weaker in the longer years and the following years if global economic sanctions were to continue, meaning that the Iranian regime post 28th of February would be much more weaker and less resilient than it was prior to February 28th.
The Gulf Cooperation Council now coming out and saying that the impact on Gulf countries is not just to do with oil and gas. Of course, that has been the greatest impact and most obvious impact of this war that we've seen around the world. But they're also saying it's going to affect food, it's going to affect medicine as well. It's important to remember that when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, we're not just talking about oil and gas and energy. We're talking about so many other things as well.
Of course, we're talking about the delivery of goods and essentials for societies in this region, but also so many other societies and countries that rely on the trading point around this part of the world. We've already seen the economic implications that this has translated to, globally speaking, but it also has two interesting points, which from a GCC point of view that goes beyond the energy aspect and point of view, is not just the energy, but it also discusses the militarized aspect, the national security of these countries, and also the humanitarian aspect. Now, from one point of view, the Iranian attacks and the US dragging the region into this war has allowed the GCC to face a military experience that is very new to it, turning it into being in the middle of a war that they did not choose to be a part of. In fact, they advocated against for it to happen to the United States in the weeks and months in the lead up to it. And then there's a humanitarian element where a lot of the attacks and the retaliatory attacks towards the so-called US bases in the region included civilian areas, civilian infrastructure, which disrupted the movement, the business, but also the security of ordinary innocent residents and citizens across the region.
Zeidon Alkinali, we appreciate, as always, you giving us that breakdown. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.